The vast world that Marvel has built has allowed fans to get their craziest stories to come to life with the multiverse concept. All these different worlds had different renditions of the same superhero, enabling the artists to go crazy. It was only last year's Across the Spider-Verse where we saw T-Rex Spidey, which doesn't even begin to tell us its unlimited possibilities. But imagine the mutants and their alternate versions, and how these arcs could be vivid and colorful. Some of our favorite X-Men have such crazy versions in alternate timelines that they prove how powerful these characters can be. One such character in an alternate version of Storm, called Bloodstorm, from Earth 21710. And other than being like Earth 616's Storm, she's also a vampire, which clearly explains the blood in her name. Let's dive into the world of Bloodstorm and her time with the X-Men. Before we get into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. How does Storm become Bloodstorm? Storm is one of the most significant characters in the vast, colorful world of X-Men mutants, and that's probably one of the main reasons she appeared in almost all of the X-Men live-action films. But we didn't ever get to see a proper exploration of her character, except for the monotonous rendition we got in 2016's lackluster film X-Men Apocalypse. Like her origin in Earth 616, Aurora Monroe of Earth 21710 was a street thief living in Egypt until one fine day when she attempted to pickpocket Dracula, which changed her life forever. Though Dracula tried to make her one of his brides, she managed to get out of his control and later joined the X-Men in their second batch lineup. We get most of her arc through the X-Men Blue storyline, Toil and Trouble, which ran from issue number 10 to 13. In this storyline, the Goblin Queen uses Hank McCoy's confusion regarding the X-Men's time displacement situation to make him a channel so she could attack them. As the X-Men try to settle into this time displacement, Hank devotes himself to the dark arts, under the influence of the Goblin Queen. He opens a gateway for her and her army, including the Hexmen. Yes, she has a fascinating sense of humor for a silly villain. The Hexmen include a variety of X-Men from alternate timelines, like Pixie, Colossus, Nightcrawler, and our POI Bloodstorm. Since they are working from him, all of them have this gothic detail added to them. Colossus looks like a knight, and Hank himself has horns on his head, which only makes them look more daunting. While they defeat almost all the X-Men inside the school, Jean and Cyclops manage to escape from their grasp. Each Hexman was promised something if they complied with the Goblin Queen. For example, Colossus, or Peter Rasputin, lost his sister, and the Queen promised him that she would bring him back. But Bloodstorm had the darkest story of them all, as she had killed some of the X-Men in her universe due to her bloodlust, with Professor Xavier and Beast among them. The Queen promised she would help get rid of Dracula's curse if she complied with the Queen. As the Queen keeps the defeated X-Men hostage and tries to summon her sisters, the X-Men try to talk sense into Beast, but in vain. Bloodstorm looks at this and realizes that the Beast is under the Queen's influence, because he doesn't intend to do any of this. This effect was very similar to the situation that she was facing when she was under the influence of Dracula. At the same time, she also realizes that the Goblin Queen's promises to each of them might be hollow, because she would probably get rid of them right when things turn out her way. So she decides to talk to the Beast and tell him that he needs to turn against her to get things right with the Beast in her universe, and Hank realizes his mistake. Hank uses whatever he's learned from the Queen to turn her sisters against her and free his friends from her captivity. Upon doing this, all the other Hexmen return to their timelines except for Bloodstorm. Cyclops asks her to join them now that she has done her part in saving them, and she decides to do so. But considering she had a history with the X-Men in her universe, we can only hope that things will turn out differently in this universe. Cyclops has undergone a somewhat tumultuous relationship with Jean Grey, and the recent mind-melding effects had only worsened, so his interaction with Bloodstorm might help her. Fate of Bloodstorm. Bloodstorm worked with the X-Men for quite a while, and Hank had also figured out a way to bring them back to their timeline. But things took a bizarre turn in the Extermination storyline. While Cyclops did grow feelings for Bloodstorm, he never addressed them, but it was understood that a mutual interest was developed between them. He decided to take her out on a date and talk about this, including how he could not bring it up because they wouldn't have much time, since Hank was planning to bring them all back to their timeline. But Bloodstorm asked him to focus on how things are at the present and try to accept them this way. Suddenly, out of nowhere, one of Cyclops' enemies arrives with his hounds and starts attacking them at the restaurant. Cyclops identifies them, since they have the same markings on their face as Kitty Pryde. Later, she explained that it was only Ahab and shared her confusion regarding his appearance. Realizing that he's Ahab's target, Cyclops asks Bloodstorm to leave so that he can deal with it himself. But Bloodstorm rejects this proposal and decides they will fight together. The duo battle it out, but Ahab ends up stabbing her with a silver-laced harpoon that he had prepared just in case he had to come across someone vampiric, like Bloodstorm. Cyclops lashes out and blows them away, and Ahab realizes he's too strong and escapes. As Cyclops carries Bloodstorm's body, she slowly starts disintegrating into dust. In an interview with Cullen Bunn, the creator of the X-Men Blue narrative, it became clear that he had many plans for Bloodstorm. His original pitch for the character and her team of Hexmen had all of them return to their original timelines, and then have further adventures in future stories. He wanted the Hexmen to go on their adventures, and this book would be called The Exiles, as the team went around their reality time stream. Bloodstorm was his favorite amongst the group, and he kept her along for the ride. His fascination with the romantic angle between Cyclops and Storm is what would result in a relationship between the two. Cullen also intended to bring Dracula from Earth 616 against Bloodstorm, and honestly, that would have been quite the story arc. Exploring these arcs would have helped her be seen as less of an alternate Storm, and more as a character of her own, with enemies and achievements that set her apart. Unraveling Bloodstorm's vampiric powers. While Bloodstorm didn't get a chance to stick around for long, her appearance clearly showed how fierce and powerful Storm can be. Even though she had a bloodlust, she managed to get over it by focusing on the enemies around her and using her issue to understand others. Eventually, this brought the better aspects of her to light. While she did have the usual Storm powers, she also had additional powers as a vampire, including shape-shifting capabilities. She can turn her body into a mist and a flock of bats as required. Another additional power included the ability to hypnotize people with her gaze, which she could use to convince them to do her bidding. Even though she's a vampire, sunlight does not seem to affect her, because she's seen playing softball in direct sunlight with the other X-Men. Marvel has had its fair share of vampire characters, including Blade and Morbius. Still, amalgamating a character's power with another being's powers makes it much more enjoyable. The mix of both characters makes them superheroes who will be quite the enemy's opponent, considering they would also be experiencing a bit of both worlds. While Aurora of Earth 21710 didn't last long, her rendition from Earth 1298, and somewhat of a similar origin story, including her interaction with Dracula. She managed to survive the curse of Dracula, since later it was discovered that she didn't get Dracula's bite, thus making her curse curable. But then her fate was left uncertain, and we never got a clear answer about whether she managed to get her piece. Another major thing about her character was that her experience in history played a critical role in her persona. While the other Hexmen seemed to be convinced by the promise made by the Goblin Queen, Bloodstorm was not having it. Even though she attacked the X-Men, she was a little less ruthless than the others and paid close attention to the events around her. While most of the other Hexmen had been members of the X-Men before, they didn't experience similar things to Bloodstorm, which only made her wiser. She realized that if she spoke to the Beast, whatever good was left inside of him would find an ally, burst out, and take action. This behavior makes her one of the better X-Men, since the team has a history of foes turning into friends. In the same storyline, we saw Magneto taking the helm of the X-Men, someone who had long been enemies of the team of superheroes. Recently, Marvel's Midnight Suns game introduced a Bloodstorm DLC, and that had fans wondering if we would get to see the vampiric version of Storm, since the primary antagonist of the story was Dracula himself. But it turned out that it was not the vampiric Storm, and she stood by Deadpool, Morbius, and Blade to defeat the enemy vampires. If only Marvel had thought about bringing Bloodstorm instead, we would have seen her get together with the other vampires in Marvel. Earth 2170 Storm would be the last time we saw Marvel turn Storm into a vampire, as the previous events included the Storms from Earth 616 and Earth 1298. When Bloodstorm first appeared in the X-Men Blue arc, people confused her for the character from Earth 1298, but specific changes to the character made her a lot different from the older rendition. We only wish that she had the chance to interact with Earth 198's Hank, who had managed to make a cure for Bloodstorm that allowed the curse to be lessened, thus removing her bloodlust. Doing this would have made her story a little less tragic than the one we've seen now.
Look to the skies!
Marvelous verdict. Bloodstorm is one of the most incredible additions to the roster of mutants, and their alternate versions that we've seen over the years. Even though she had a small appearance, you always wonder if Marvel will find a way to bring her back to life. But there's a clear chance for her to make an appearance in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where we have already had a glance at an alternate version of heroes making tiny appearances. We did get to see Reed Richards, played by John Krasinski, dying at the hands of Scarlet Witch, and recently, it was announced that Pedro Pascal will be our original Reed Richards. Bringing this version of Bloodstorm to life would do a lot of justice to Storm's previous appearances in the Fox Studios X-Men films, where she appeared primarily as a side character. Since the X-Men are already under development at the MCU, and Beast has already appeared in the Marvels, Bloodstorm making a cameo won't be a big surprise. If the live action doesn't work, we always have What If, and since villains ganging up seems to be a theme too, why not let the plans for Hexmen come to fruition? And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.
That was half my power.